Our South Asian families and communities are very collectivistic. You're doing great, like you're doing awesome. And it's a little bit of falsified optimism in my opinion. I don't know if you've heard the term of like bed rotting, right? Where it's just a lot of youth, I think, use it more.
What happens when you combine the rigor of a future physician with the heart of an advocate for mental health among the youth? You get someone like my guest today, who isn't just waiting for the future of healthcare, she's building it. Astha Soni is a dual degree graduate in psychology and human development from the University of California, Davis, who hopes to inspire young adults, especially among the South Asian communities, to balance mental health and cultural identities. Ms. Soni, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Ms. Soni, you started off your work on mental health and the awareness and the importance of mental health among the youth through your blog called The Essence of Self. Mm-hmm. Why at this time do you think this conversation is very important, especially among young adults as yourself?
So when I was around 14, 15, as a normal part of growing up, or when I started kind of approaching my teenage years, I went through a lot of mental health struggles and just kind of navigating my own mental health, but also navigating it in a South Asian and an immigrant Indian family where those things weren't really talked about. So kind of from my experiences, I then built on through my blog and through my personal journey of why it was important to talk about mental health, especially if maybe your family, your culture, or your community environment doesn't really cater those conversations. So that's kind of where my blog came into play. And then in the future, as I grew older, I realized that, a lot of youth did find resonance with my blog and having that sense of community, even though maybe their own families didn't really foster those conversations. So from there, I kind of became more public in my advocacy and inspiring more youth to come out, share their stories, and kind of center their mental health around community rather than away from it.
And why South Asian communities? What do you think is the most important topic that we are not talking about and needs importance?
I think this notion of mental health is often seen as a weakness in a lot of South Asian families. And so I think it's really prevalent in our community, especially because we also have this notion of like log kya kahenge in Hindi, which translates to like what will people say or what will they think about you if they find out that you're dealing with a mental health condition. So I think that's why it's really important to talk about it in our culture and our community. Our South Asian families and communities are very collectivistic. So we all have this sense of togetherness, but it can be a good and a bad thing because it's a good thing that you have support and you have community and everyone's tight-knit. But the moment that you may have a personal struggle, you might feel hesitant sharing that with someone. And if you do share it, it might be seen as the burden of an entire community rather than, something you are personally dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. So you grew up in this environment with a lot of online conversation, right? Yeah. And you're also from a generation that's being told you can be whoever and whatever you want to be. So does this freedom, do you feel that this is freedom, or do you feel that this hand dealt with infinite choices is actually affecting your mind?
I think in psychology, we learned this term called like decision fatigue, right? It's where you're constantly bombarded with choices and you're given this freedom, I guess, to be what you want and do what you want. I think it's a privilege to be able to experience that and to live in a world where we are told to go and make those choices for ourselves. But I think subconsciously we're always pressured of, yeah, I do have the choice, but what if my choice is the wrong choice? Like, even if I do have the freedom to make that choice, there's always going to be something in the back of your head that's like, what if it's wrong? Or what if this isn't what my family wants me to do? Even though they say, whatever you want to do, go achieve it, right? But it's like, okay, but what if this is what I want to achieve? What if it's not aligning with their goals or their kind of aspirations for me? So it can be a little bit challenging. But I think the way I navigated around it is freedom to me is a privilege. So I kind of think of it like that. Like if I have the opportunities or I have the privilege to be able to make these choices, obviously these kind of factors consider into me making my choice, but at the end of the day, whatever I decide to do, I'm privileged enough to be able to pick that I can do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you feel that the whole I don't have to be in this rat race or everybody has a timeline is doing you disadvantage than an advantage.
Yeah, I think definitely an advantage. I think you live your life at your own pace. It can be hard when you're comparing yourself with others and kind of trying to match everybody's timeline.
Which
Especially
is too obvious in this room because of the online presence.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me personally, and where I'm at in my life, I'm in my 20s. And I think seeing the discourse around like what people are doing in their 20s online, especially, it's like some of my friends are getting engaged and like getting married. And then some of my friends are starting a new job. And then, you know, some people are traveling the world. And it's kind of a very broad spectrum. And it does make you think that within
Am I not there yet?
Yes. Where should I be? Like, should I be at that stage where I'm, you know, like thinking about a future, or should I be at that stage where I'm building my current career? And I kind of get caught in that a little bit. But again, I think I just have to remind myself that my journey is unique and my path is, you know, going to be on my own time.
So when you give this keynote speeches and you interact with young adults as yourself, what is the conversation that you usually have in order to collect yourself and, you know, be grounded?
I have a sister who's 16. So she is the age group of, you know, usually youth that I give speeches to. So I kind of run my speech with her before. And the thing about teenagers is they're brutally honest. I think a little too much. So giving my speech to my sister sometimes is like my preparation of how will an actual youth or like a teenager perceive what I'm saying. And a lot of times I've gone back and reworked a lot of keynote speeches, a lot of workshops, because my sister or just, you know, her friends, or if I look in the lens of her, I think, you know what, like it's not clicking. Something's not resonating with them. And I think it's because teenagers want that like personal feel so much more. I think everybody knows about the importance of mental health, right? And everybody's constantly bombarded with these statistics of 1 in 8 people in the US die by suicide, or like 1 in 12 teenagers faces a mental health condition, right? Like those statistics, they know the importance of that. They know that they have to take care of themselves. But I think where my speeches and workshops have made a difference is I'm able to be real with them and not give them this like falsified advice and just, you know, be like, yeah, you're dealing with some mental health struggles. Just take a self-care bath and, you know, chill out and focus on yourself. I think it's a little bit more important to be realistic with them because I've been a teenager before. A lot of them currently don't have the time to take care of themselves, or they're so busy worrying about other things that they deem as more important than taking care of themselves, right? So in my speeches, I kind of tailor and alter it in ways that I know they will actually take home with them. And I know that it's a tangible thing they can work on.
Yeah. So you mentioned self-care.
Yeah.
Honestly, nowadays self-care is a hashtag, right?
Yeah.
A bubble bath, scented candles, a day at the gym, or a haircut, right?
Yeah.
What according to you from the conversations that you've had should be a radical self-care, and what does it look like?
We definitely need to move beyond the whole capitalized version of self-care. But if that works for some people, of course, I'm not, you know, going to be the one to discredit that. But I think really self-care is whatever you want it to look like. For me, when I was in college, I think that was a really big time where I had to learn how to self-care. I think when you're at home and you're busy with school and you're, you know, at home with your family, it's hard to kind of take that time away for just yourself. Because you're constantly around people, whether it be at school, extracurriculars, then with your family. In college, that was the first time I was alone by myself a lot of the time. And so my kind of self-care evolved to cleaning. So I really like organizing and cleaning. And I noticed myself doing it quite a bit in my first 2 years of college.
Helps you.
Yeah. And I realized that, you know, like for me, this was a form of self-care because if my mind felt cluttered or foggy and I felt like I was overthinking or had a lot of thoughts, cleaning my physical space then helped me kind of feel mentally at peace. And that was one form of self-care. Another was just going on a walk sometimes, which I know is another common one. But it does help. I think it helps to reconnect with yourself, listen to music, do whatever works. And I think there's no wrong form of self-care. I've seen this recent thing on social media. I don't know if you've heard the term of like bed rotting, right? Where it's just a lot of youth, I think, use it more. But it's just like where sometimes kids will take a day and just not do anything and like rot in their bed, essentially. And I remember getting a question in a workshop of like a teenager asked me, she was like, would you consider bed rotting as self-care? And I was like, would you? Like, does it help you feel better? And she was like, yeah, actually. Sometimes on the weekends, I sleep the whole day. And then at night, I feel rested and recharged. And I was like, if a bubble bath can do that for some people, bed rotting can do that for you, right? So I wouldn't say there's any right or wrong. And traditionally, people see bed rotting as like, oh, it's unproductive and you're just sitting there, you know? But if that's what helps you rest and recharge, I think you know what works for you.
Okay. No, I'm very interested. So you are a generation that was born into an online, life.
Yeah.
I walked into it. It's a little different for me, right? So when you just said bed rotting, and I just want to know, where do you draw the line between laziness and bed rotting? And when you are bombarded with the new terms that you see online, do you feel that young adults such as yourself are over pathologizing human emotions? I'm bored, but that is a thin line from being frustrated. But you use the word frustrated than being bored. So are you over pathologizing your emotions?
Definitely. I think a lot of the younger generation, like if I look back at myself in high school, I think I had a really hard time kind of naming those emotions or really figuring out what I went through. And that's kind of actually where my blog came from, is because I didn't know what I was going through. I just kind of wrote about it as a journal entry almost. And people would connect with that. But I think nowadays we kind of get into this thing of wanting to put a name to everything because it helps us feel better that like, okay, this is what I'm going through. And now that I have a name, it feels a little bit more real. And so I've noticed that in a lot of high schoolers that, have self-diagnosed mental health conditions because they see these things online. And maybe they do have those conditions, but I think because they can see it online, it kind of deters them from getting actual professional help or a professional diagnosis because they're like, well, TikTok told me I have ADHD, right? And I saw this girl with ADHD and I think I'm a lot like her. And that can be a beneficial thing for, if you're a kid that really doesn't know how to put those names to a feeling. But also it can be, like you said, over pathologizing where you might not actually know what you're going through, but you're trying to grasp similarities or grasp like a definition so that you can make your feelings feel more real.
Yeah.
So I think the whole realness and the whole wanting to call it as it is can be a double-edged sword.
So your conversations with South Asians, right? You mentioned that log kya kahenge? What would people say? What is the other areas that we are not talking about and needs an equal attention?
I think mental health is probably one of the biggest kind of things. More specific to that, I would say the more severe or prevalent mental health conditions, or even just how much at risk like youth are for suicide.
No.
I think suicide is a very, very taboo topic in a lot of South Asian families. And I remember, I think 2-3 years ago, there was a student near my campus that actually died by suicide. I remember hearing how the local community was addressing it and, that he didn't think about his parents when he did it, or it seemed like it was the blame was on him. And it was your actions resulted in the hurt or affected many other people, which is valid. Obviously, when a life gets taken, it does impact the people around them. But I think with the mental health aspect being added to it, it almost felt like you didn't think about the fact that your family would be hurt when you had a mental health condition. Like you having a mental health struggle was you being selfish. And I think that's a very big thing I don't see talked about a lot, is this whole like because South Asians or because Indians come from this collectivistic culture, mental health is a very personal thing, right? When you're going through a struggle, it's yours. But I don't think our community sees it that way. They see it as, okay, my kid is going through a struggle, so obviously we feel the hurt of it. We feel the impact. So then it takes away from their individual experience, and then it becomes, how do your actions impact us? How do your feelings impact our feelings? And then it becomes really hard to talk about those things, because it almost feels like, well, if my distress is causing my family so much pain, then I don't want to talk about my distress. And then that can then bundle up and create a snowball effect and, make mental health a lot worse in our communities. But we don't talk about it enough.
Yeah. What is that, you personally, having, being aware, you've learned it, what is that one boundary that you have set for yourself? Maybe it was blocking somebody, just for your peace of mind. What is that one radical self-care boundary that you've set for yourself?
That's a good question. I'm really bad at boundary setting. I think that's something I'm working on. But if I had to say one, I think I've gotten a lot better at saying no. I'm a person that will never limit any opportunity that comes my way, and never limit myself from helping others or helping myself. But sometimes it can get to the point where I may be sacrificing my own mental health and my well-being for the benefit of, something else. So I've gotten better at saying no to other people, but more importantly, like better at saying no to myself.
Yeah. So when you're giving your keynote speeches, what advice do you give to young adults on what to do?
I think probably my biggest takeaway within everything, and we've talked about it, is give yourself permission to mess it up. I think we are so scared, especially when you're in high school. You feel like this is make or break.
Especially when you're living on a timeline, right?
Yes.
I mean, everything needs to be perfect and posted.
Yep.
So you don't want to mess it up.
And when you're a student, it's like all of your actions can, determine your future, your career. And I think the biggest thing I tell them that I needed to hear as a kid too was give yourself permission to mess it up. And you'll give yourself permission to mess up your self-care. Give yourself permission to, be okay with messed up feelings sometimes. Just know that you are going to navigate it on your own time and at your own pace. And if that happens later than your friends, or that happens in a different way than your friends, it's okay. So when they hear it's okay to mess up, they're like, wait, what? That's
not what I was taught at home. Don't mess it up.
Yeah, I think it takes people aback a little bit, because they're like, in all the mental health speeches I've listened to, everyone's like, no, you're doing great. You're doing awesome. And, it's a little bit of falsified optimism in my opinion. And so when they hear me talk, I'm like, yeah, it's okay to mess up. Honestly, it's okay to have a bad mental health practice that brings you joy, as long as you figure out what works for you later. And they're always taken aback. They're like, wait, what? She's telling me I can mess up? But it is really important to hear sometimes.
But optimism plays a huge role in our mental health, right?
Yes.
So from all the interactions you've had, what is the one leading question that you wish people would tell them or ask themselves or affirm about themselves when they wake up in the morning? What would you advise?
Probably what can I do today to make today better?
Not make me better, make today better.
Make today better. Yeah. Because I think it is really hard to change yourself overnight. And especially with feelings and dealing with complicated mental health conditions, you can't change that overnight. So I think a really big thing, kind of an affirmation I almost tell myself as well, is what can I do today to make today better? And it kind of gets you to focus on the now, and be grounded and be present in whatever you're doing right now. Because the rest will unfold, right?
Interesting. But I've always felt people prefer to say, today was a terrible day for me. Today was not great.
Yep.
So how do you flip that?
It's hard. It is really hard. It's all of this is easier said than done. I 100% will say. But if today was a terrible day and you're sleeping, then again, remind yourself, what can I do today to make it a better today? You know, like every day kind of working towards those steps of, yeah, yesterday was really crappy. How can I make it slightly less crappy today? And it's kind of like, again, like merging that future planning with today planning. And you are going to have to accept that some days will be crappy and some days will be terrible. And that's okay. As long as you can take maybe 5 minutes out of the day to do something to make it feel a little less crappy. So that's kind of where that tangible self-care comes in, is if you had a crappy day and you know, had a whole day of school or had a whole day of work and you come home and you're like, wow, today was terrible. What in your mind would, if you had to pick a 5-minute activity, something you could do in 5 minutes, limited effort, whatever capacity you have at the end of that day, what could you do to make it a little less crappy?
Interesting. Very interesting. So in order to wind up our entire conversation to one last question, you talked about the aesthetics of self-care, like walking barefoot on the grass or journaling and so on and so forth. What, according to you, or in your life, what do you do in order to maintain the essence of yourself and keep yourself at calm and peace?
There's a bunch of things. I would say the biggest being, like, I check in with myself a lot of, I'm a big writer, obviously. So writing has always kind of been an outlet. I have a little journal, don't use it very often, but if it is that kind of day where I just need to sit with myself, I'll kind of just write down my thoughts, and it doesn't have to be cohesive. I don't even write full sentences sometimes. There's grammatical errors, whatever it may be. I don't put pressure on myself to just do it right. I think I just do what I need. And a big form of that has been writing. I think another big thing is, since I'm such an extroverted person, I'm a big people person. So for me, it's like surrounding myself with people that I know will make it not seem that big. Like, I have people in my life where I could be going through the biggest problem of my life, or like a really big thing that might be taking up all my mental capacity.
Who doesn't drain your energy.
Yeah. And I'll go to this one friend or I'll go to this one person and they make it seem like it's nothing. They're like, oh, that's it. Let's go get coffee. And to me, it's like, what? I've been thinking about this for 5 days. And for you, it's not that they're discrediting me or like making me feel like my problems are small, but it's almost like they make me feel like I can live with those problems.
So what rituals would you suggest people do in order to keep their day or start off good?
I'm kind of getting into the practice of this, but starting your day off slow, as in like, don't get on your phone the first thing. I think that was really draining my energy. I'm guilty of scrolling on Instagram the first thing in the morning for like 10 to 15 minutes. And already my brain has taken a massive like dopamine hit, you know, where the rest of your day kind of drags along because you've already kind of falsified your brain's dopamine in the first 15 minutes of you waking up. So one thing I'm learning to do, and advice I would give to other people, is start your day or start your morning slow and start it intentionally. Whether that looks like meditating in the morning for you, praying, listening to just calming music or something that makes you feel good, and then getting off your phone, at least for the first 5 to 10 minutes of when you wake up, I think is really helpful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed this conversation. Yeah, it's usually a taboo. People do not want to make this, but this was totally awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You asked me a lot of questions I had to think about myself that I haven't answered in any other thing before. So you got me thinking about myself, which is good.
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.